You're good at following orders, but we're looking for someone who can actually lead.
That was the last thing he said before walking out of the meeting room without waiting for a reply. I was halfway through reviewing the quarterly sales data when Travis Langford stormed into my office without knocking. No email, no warning, just the sound of polished dress shoes slapping the tile, a sharp motion and a thick folder tossed onto my desk, like a challenge. "Meredith," he said, not looking at me, not even pausing, "we need to talk." Now, I didn't flinch. Not even a blink. After 4 years working under him, I'd gotten used to the performance. The commanding tone, the walk-in without knocking dominance, the subtle reminder that his title was bigger than mine. "Of course," I said evenly, gesturing toward the guest chair across from my desk. He didn't sit. Of course he didn't, Travis. Langford didn't sit unless it was at the head of a table or across from someone who'd already been beaten. "The board has decided to restructure the leadership team," he announced. Voice clipped, efficient, "we're moving in a new direction." I looked down at the folder, still closed, still untouched, then back at him. "Are you firing me?" He smirked, that small, insufferable smirk he used when he thought he was being clever. "Let's not be dramatic. We're releasing you from your position effective immediately. No performance review, no conversation, no mention of the fact that my department had just delivered the highest revenue growth in 3 years. "Not even a thank you, I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "May I ask why?" He crossed his arms, face unreadable in that artificial way that meant he'd practiced this line. "You lack leadership vision," he said. "You're good at tasks, excellent even, but this industry demands more than spreadsheets. It needs presence, confidence, command. And frankly," he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make it sting, "you just don't project that." There it was, not even veiled, a corporate dig wrapped in buzzwords. What he really meant was, "You're not loud enough, not forceful enough, not like me." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, at the man who had never once asked me about my ideas in a strategy meeting, who'd taken credit for my forecasts more than once, who called me detail-oriented, in the same tone others might say, timid. I folded my hands in my lap. Understood. He frowned slightly. He'd expected outrage, panic, maybe even tears. "I'll need your badge and laptop by the end of the day," he said. "Access will be disabled by 5. HR has your severance documents." I nodded. "Thank you for the clarity." He blinked. Actually blinked. Then stiffly, he extended his hand. I shook it. "Cool. Steady. Good luck out there," he said. I smiled faintly. "You too." And just like that, he turned and left. The door clicked shut behind him. And for a long moment, I didn't move. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. In fact, I felt lighter. Because what Travis didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that 2 weeks ago, everything had changed. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the photo frame I'd always kept hidden. My father standing in front of the first regional office he'd opened 30 years ago. A ribbon in one hand, my tiny hand in the other. He used to say, "Never let them see your next move until it's already done." That morning, sitting in the same leather chair, where I'd weathered years of being overlooked, I realized it was finally time. I began packing slowly, deliberately, no panic. Just a quiet inventory of what mattered. A ceramic mug from last Christmas signed by the team who once trusted me. A small potted plant that had somehow survived 3 office relocations. A stack of old notebooks, their covers worn, filled with ideas that Travis had dismissed without reading. I ran my fingers over the pages as I slid them into the box. In the corner of one page, I found a sticky note in my father's handwriting. I had torn it from a folder years ago and kept it hidden between the pages. It said, "When the room gets too loud, the one who's quiet will always be underestimated. That's when you win." I smiled, a real one this time. As I walked past the marketing pod, a few heads turned, some sympathetic, some awkward. One woman gave me a weak smile, then quickly looked away. I smiled back anyway. No one said anything, but I could read their faces. Did she get fired? Why her? What did she do wrong? I kept walking. The air outside was sharper than I expected for a spring afternoon. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. 15 years I'd given everything to that company, and they'd stripped it away like it meant nothing, but it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a release. I pulled out my phone and texted a number that had been saved under SK. Personal, it's time, activate the trust. The reply came back within seconds. Understood. Meeting can be scheduled in 48 hours. I turned once to look at the glass building behind me. Sleek, impressive, but hollow inside. They thought they had ended my career. What they had actually done was hand me the green light I'd been waiting for. The envelope had waited 5 years to be opened, thick, heavy, sealed with my father's embossed initials. It had sat in the back of my closet behind winter coats and boxes of old journals, untouched and unopened, because that's exactly what he'd asked me to do. Not a day before your 30th birthday, my father had said, with a quiet, unmistakable seriousness. When the clock strikes midnight, it's yours. Not a moment earlier. At the time, I'd laughed, thought it was a sentimental gesture, maybe a birthday letter, or some old stock certificates, worth just enough for a weekend getaway. But now, as I sat in the small panelled office that once belonged to him, the weight of that envelope felt different. It was no longer just paper and glue. It was intention strategy. A message designed for this exact moment. I looked around. The room hadn't changed since the day we held his memorial. The same mahogany desk, the same leather chairs, the same framed newspaper clippings from the early days, when the company was nothing but a startup he'd run out of our garage. I reached for the envelope and broke the seal. Inside 2 documents. The first was a handwritten letter in my father's steady, elegant script, the kind he insisted on practicing long after everyone switched to email. Meredith. If you're reading this, you've turned 30, which means by now you've learned the world doesn't always reward the quiet ones. But I want you to know, I always saw you, always believed in you. You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the credit. I watched you grow patient, precise, resilient. And I knew one day the people around you would either recognize your worth or you'd have to show them. This company changed after I stepped away. I saw it coming, I didn't like it, that's why I made a plan. You don't need a seat at the table, you own the table. Love, Dad. I stared at the page as my throat tightened. It wasn't just a letter. It was a torch. I unfolded the second document, notarized, official, sealed by the state of Massachusetts. It was a trust agreement dated 5 years ago, the day before he passed. My father had transferred 90% of his retained ownership in one of our company's most critical subsidiaries, a tech and logistics firm he'd acquired just before stepping down into my name, effective the day I turned 30. 90%. I blinked hard, rereading every line. It wasn't just symbolic ownership. It came with full voting rights, operational authority, executive override. I wasn't just a figurehead, I was the company. And now, after Travis had so proudly erased me from the very firm my father had built, I held more power than he could ever imagine. I called Samuel Kerrigan the next morning. He'd been my father's legal advisor, friend, and confidant, the kind of man who never said more than necessary, but when he spoke, people listened. Is this real? I asked, holding the trust agreement like it might vanish if I blinked. Yes, he said simply. Your father structured the trust with airtight clauses, no board approval necessary, no public record until you activated it. Why wait until I turned 30? His voice softened. He wanted you to see the company for what it would become, to decide if it was still worth fighting for. That hit harder than I expected, because I had seen it slowly rot from the inside. The soul of it traded away in favor of ego and efficiency. A culture once built on trust, now fueled by intimidation and performance theater, and at the center of it all stood Travis Langford, the man who saw me as a paper pusher with a polite smile. He never once considered that I might be more. 2 days later, I met with Jeanette Vaughan, the trustee who had quietly managed the holding company attached to the trust. We sat in her corner office, downtown glass walls surrounding us like a quiet aquarium. Jeanette was sharp, composed, with silver-streaked hair and a gaze that could strip a man's confidence in seconds. "I've been waiting for this day," she said, as she handed me a thick file. "Your father was meticulous. He knew who would rise and who would rot." Inside the file, operating agreements, financial statements, employee feedback surveys, projected models. It wasn't just paperwork, it was evidence. The firm I now controlled had been intentionally insulated from Travis's influence, tucked into its own legal entity, functioning quietly. And though it was smaller than the main corporation, its infrastructure was powerful. Global logistics, integrated cloud operations, a workforce of 200 underutilized engineers and analysts, most of whom had joined under my father's leadership. "This company is yours," Jeanette said. "No one can touch it without your say." I stared at the documents. Every page screamed potential. Everything Travis had tried to bury, every value my father held was waiting here. It didn't need to be salvaged. It needed to be revived. That night, I sat by my apartment window, watching Boston light up like a constellation. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late to fix reports Travis would never read, about the meetings where I'd been talked over, about the promotions handed to louder voices, about the exit interview HR had scheduled, then cancelled without explanation. I didn't feel bitterness, I felt clarity. Let them have their corner office egos and ego-boosting titles. I had something more powerful than respect. I had leverage. The next morning, I texted Samuel again. "Let's begin." His reply came in under a minute board meeting prep underway. Suggestion: keep leadership core small. I already knew who I wanted. People who'd been passed over. People who hadn't had the right look. The ones who worked quietly, brilliantly, and were never asked to speak. The ones like me. By June, the new boardroom no longer smelled like failure. It smelled like paint, fresh coffee, and possibility. The renovation was almost complete. The ceiling tiles no longer sagged. The carpet had been replaced. The fluorescent lights, once dim and flickering, were swapped out for warm, clear panels. We'd taken the office apart piece by piece and built it again. Quietly, carefully. Just like I planned. What Travis had dismissed as a dead-end acquisition had become something far more powerful, our new beginning. I didn't need applause. I didn't need PR campaigns or performative LinkedIn announcements. I just needed a team, a real one. So I started calling people. Tessa Klein was the first to say yes. She'd been in customer relations for 7 years, unofficially doing 3 jobs, while her direct supervisor took credit for all her strategies. She'd left the company 6 months before I was fired after filing a discrimination complaint that disappeared into HR's dark hole. When I called her, there was a long pause. "You sure you want me?" she asked, her voice careful. "I don't want the resume," I said. "I want the person who made the client retention rate jump by 23% without a title to show for it." Tessa laughed. A real surprise kind of laugh. "I'll be there Monday." Owen Pratt was harder to convince. He was one of our brightest engineers. Brilliant, precise, and allergic to office politics. He'd been told more than once that he needed to smile more in meetings and learn how to sell his ideas better. When he resigned, Travis had waved it off. He's not a team player anyway, but Owen was a builder. And builders recognize when a foundation has potential. When we met at a small cafe near the public garden, he listened without interruption as I laid out the vision. Not just the company, but the culture. "We're not just fixing numbers," I told him. "We're fixing the silence, the system that punishes quiet people for not shouting. You don't need to play politics here. Just do good work." He nodded once. That was all it took. By the end of summer, we had a full leadership team, all of them people like me. Brilliant, overlooked, underestimated. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about systems, ethics, accountability. We didn't chase headlines. We chased results. And slowly the company began to move, like it had a heartbeat again. Then on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-August, something happened that made me stop breathing. I was reviewing a batch of internal applications for a new executive operations position. We'd grown faster than expected, and we needed someone to help scale our infrastructure. I scrolled through familiar names, and then I saw his Travis Langford. The resume was clinical, polished attached. No mention of the scandal that had pushed him out of the old firm, just vague phrasing. Transitioned out of prior executive role to pursue growth-oriented leadership opportunity. Attached was a cover letter, I believe, in transformative leadership, driven by performance and innovation. I'm eager to bring my experience to a forward-facing company committed to operational excellence. I read it twice. He had no idea I was here, that I was reading this, that I now led the company he was trying to join. My hand hovered over the delete key. I could have erased him in a second. No. Callback. No explanation, just like he did to me, but I didn't press it. Instead, I clicked. Shortlist. Then I picked up my phone and texted Samuel. "You're not going to believe this," he replied instantly. He applied. "Yep. You want him in the room? I want to see who he is when the titles are gone." That night, I sat by the large window in my new corner office. Not the biggest office, not the tallest building, but it was mine. The city glowed in amber and silver. Streetlights blinked in rhythm with the traffic below. Somewhere down there, Travis was preparing for a job interview. He didn't know the woman he once called, not leadership material, would be sitting across from him. He didn't know the quiet one, he dismissed had become the decision-maker, but he would soon. The door opened exactly at 10:00 a.m. He was always punctual. Even now, Travis Langford stepped into the conference room with the same sharp posture he had used for years, shoulders back, chin, slightly raised eyes, scanning for control before a word was spoken. Except this time, no one stood up and no one called him sir. I didn't say a word as he entered, just sat there at the end of the long glass table pen, resting neatly beside my notepad. Eyes locked on his. He froze mid-step, and for a second, just one flickering second, I saw real fear pass across his face. "Meredith," he said, voice tightening. "Didn't expect." I gave him a polite smile, "Mr. Langford," I said calmly. "Please have a seat." He didn't move, his gaze darted to the door, then back to me, as if someone else might appear. Some escape hatch, but this wasn't the kind of room you walked out of once you were inside. Not anymore. After a beat, he sat slowly, as if his body wasn't quite sure it had permission. The silence stretched. I could almost hear his thoughts scrambling. He was calculating fast, trying to decide how to spin this, to take back control. But control was no longer his to have. I wasn't aware he started, then paused, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. The watch on his wrist gleamed, the same one he used to tap impatiently in meetings whenever someone took too long to speak. "I wasn't aware you were involved with this company. Imagine you weren't," I said, voice even. "Your cover letter didn't mention much about your last exit. I take it you've been keeping busy." Something in his expression tightened. "I've taken some time to recalibrate. Step back. Reflect. Sounds like a good use of time," I said. "That's what I did too after being released without warning." His jaw moved slightly, grinding. I didn't give him the satisfaction of filling the silence. Let it linger. Let him sit with it. "May I ask," he said finally, "are you here?" "As part of HR." I smiled again, this time faintly. "I'm here," I said, "because I make the final decision." He blinked, once hard. Then he gave a short exhale, half laugh, half disbelief. "So, you're the CEO?" I finished. "Yes." He leaned back slightly, and for the first time since I had known him, Travis Langford looked small in a chair. He opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it. I waited. "I wasn't expecting this," he admitted, "but I suppose that's my mistake." "Yes," I said, "it is." The room felt different now. The power had shifted, and it wasn't subtle. It lived in the way I didn't flinch when he spoke, the way I didn't need to raise my voice, the way he had to watch his words, now the same way I used to in every meeting he ran. We began the interview the way I would with anyone else. "What do you believe is the most important quality in a leader?" He hesitated. "Decisiveness, even if the decision is wrong." He frowned. Well, no. I mean, decisions should be data-driven, but once you choose, you commit, I nodded. Writing something down. Interesting. And how do you approach team conflict? Another pause, longer. I encourage open dialogue, even when the other person doesn't talk like you do. Travis stiffened. I didn't push. Not yet. I walked him through questions. Strategy, operations, crisis management. He tried to be polished, polite, even deferential at times. But the arrogance leaked through, like ink bleeding into paper. He was used to power. He wasn't used to having none between questions. I let a moment stretch just a few seconds too long, just enough for him to notice that I was controlling the pace, that I wasn't trying to impress him. At one point, I asked, "Tell me about a time you overlooked someone and it backfired." He hesitated, then chuckled awkwardly. "Well, I suppose. This." His voice cracked on the last syllable. I didn't laugh. I just wrote something in my notebook, not words, just a check mark. I looked at him, and suddenly I remembered something I hadn't thought of in months. A meeting 2 years ago. I had prepared a presentation with a detailed forecast. I had spent the whole weekend tweaking numbers, refining language. Travis barely looked at it. Halfway through my talk, he'd interrupted me. "Meredith, I need you to stop explaining and just listen. People like you do great work, but you need someone with presence to deliver the message. Let James present it." I had nodded, quiet, composed. Even as the report I had created was handed to someone else to take credit for, that memory burned, now not with anger but with recognition. He had trained himself to ignore people like me, and now I was the only person in the room who mattered. By the end of the interview, he looked tired. Not physically, ego-tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from not being the smartest man in the room for the first time in a long time. I closed my notebook. "One final question," I said. He sat straighter, clearly relieved. We were close to the end. "Do you believe someone can be a strong leader, even if they're quiet?" He stared at me. The room went still, and for once he didn't answer. I rose from my chair and extended my hand. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Langford." He stood slowly, then hesitated. "I underestimated you," he said. I nodded. "You did." He glanced around the room as if trying to memorize the moment. "I suppose I'll wait to hear back." I tilted my head slightly. "We'll be in touch." And just like that, he walked out. No arrogance, no applause, just silence. The same silence he once used as a weapon against me. Now it was mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Not because I regretted letting him walk in. But because I was asking myself a question that had no easy answer. What kind of leader do I want to be? The temptation was there, of course. The clean revenge. A curt rejection email. A subtle message that said, "I remember what you did, and now I get to shut the door on you." But something about it didn't sit right. Because deep down, I knew I didn't come this far to play by Travis Langford's rules. I came to build something different. The next morning, I walked into the office early. The sun hadn't fully reached the windows yet, and the halls were quiet in that sacred way. Just the hum of lights, the smell of fresh coffee, the distant click of someone's keyboard. Tessa was already at her desk, deep in a spreadsheet. She glanced up, smiling. "You're early, couldn't sleep. Let me guess. Langford." I raised an eyebrow. "You knew," she smirked. "I saw his name on the interview schedule. Honestly, I thought it was a mistake. You really met with him, I did." And I paused. He was polite, controlled, careful, not the same man who used to walk into rooms like he owned the air. Tessa studied me for a moment. "So, what are you going to do?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Later that day, I found myself in the small lounge near the east stairwell. It wasn't much, just 2 chairs, a coffee table, and a large window that overlooked the city. But it was quiet and private. I sat there, notebook in hand, scribbling thoughts, not about Travis, about leadership, about legacy, about my father. He never raised his voice, never demanded attention, yet when he entered a room, people listened, not because they were afraid, but because they trusted him, because he built something that wasn't about being seen, but about being solid. I remembered what he told me once years ago when I was still an intern. Loud people build monuments. Quiet people build structures that last. By early afternoon, I had made my decision. But before I sent the final word to HR, I asked for a second opinion. Samuel Kerrigan met me in my office at 3 p.m. sharp, wearing his usual grey suit and calm expression. "I assume this is about Langford," he said, taking a seat across from me. "It is. I've reviewed his application. Technically, he's qualified. Experienced, knows operations inside and out, but he's not someone I'd bet the soul of a company on." I nodded slowly. "That's what I thought too. And I don't need someone to run the playbook. I need someone who knows when to throw it out." Samuel studied me. "Are you sure you want to turn him down quietly? You could make a statement. He humiliated you." "The optics would be poetic." I closed my notebook. "I don't need poetry, Sam. I need peace." I drafted the rejection email myself. "Dear Mr. Langford, thank you for taking the time to speak with us regarding the executive operations role. After careful consideration, we've decided to move forward with other candidates whose approach aligns more closely with the company's long-term cultural vision. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Meredith Blake, Chief Executive Officer." It wasn't petty. It wasn't cruel. It was clear, respectful, final. I didn't sign it with satisfaction, I signed it with closure. The next morning, Tessa brought cupcakes to the office. Not because of Travis, but because it was Owen's 1-year anniversary since returning. We gathered in the break room, marketing interns, engineers, even custodial staff, people from every level, no hierarchy, just people. We toasted to 1 year of building something real, of being seen, of being heard without shouting. And for 20 minutes I sat in that circle, laughing over shared jokes, listening to stories about failed prototypes and saved clients. My title didn't matter there, but my presence did. As the day ended, I passed the whiteboard in the engineering wing. Someone had scrawled a phrase in blue marker. "The quiet ones always outlast the noise." I didn't know who wrote it, but I knew it was true. Travis Langford would find another title somewhere else. But here, he'd finally learn what it felt like to be overlooked, not out of spite, but because the culture had changed, because quiet now had a seat at the table, and I was the one holding the pen. It was exactly 1 year to the day. 12 months since I'd packed my things into a small box and walked out of a company I helped build, dismissed without fanfare or warning. 12 months since the man in the tailored suit told me I lacked presence, as if voice volume determined value. And now I stood at the top of a different building, not taller but stronger. Not built on bravado, built on belief. The elevator chimed softly as I stepped out onto the executive floor. The walls were lined with framed photos, not of stock prices or ribbon cuttings, but of people. Our people, engineers, smiling in front of a breakthrough prototype. Customer service staff, ringing a charity bell together. A janitor, high-fiving an intern after her first presentation. There were no golden plaques, no portraits of founders looking down from gilded frames, just faces. Because leadership here wasn't about who sat in the biggest office, it was about who showed up for others, even when no one was watching. "Morning." "Miss Blake," the receptionist said as I passed. I smiled gently. "Meredith, please. We're all on the same team." She grinned. "Of course." My office door was slightly ajar. I liked it that way. Open, approachable. Inside, the light poured through the wide windows, casting a warm glow across the walnut desk. On the wall behind me, framed in simple steel, was a black and white photo of my father not looking powerful but peaceful, one hand in his pocket, the other resting gently on my shoulder. I was 10 in the photo. I looked at it every morning before I sat down, and every evening before I left. The quarterly numbers were in revenue, up 31%, customer retention, up 24%, turnover down by half. But more than the metrics, what mattered was how we got there. We'd built new promotion policies based on peer feedback, not politics. We introduced quiet leader tracks designed for high-impact team members who didn't necessarily want to manage but deserved recognition and growth. We rewrote performance reviews to include values, not just numbers, and we listened, really listened. One of our quietest engineers suggested an entirely new client onboarding process, and now client satisfaction was at an all-time high. In the past, that voice would have been drowned out. Now it was spotlighted. Around noon, I headed to the conference room. The monthly town hall was about to start. Instead of rows of chairs and stiff podiums, we had cafe tables and warm lighting. People brought their own mugs. Someone always brought banana bread. No one wore a tie unless they wanted to. I stepped up to the front, no script in hand, just a deep breath. "Good afternoon," I began. Voice steady but unraised. "Some of you know today marks exactly 1 year since I left the company I used to work for." Murmurs of recognition. Back then, I was told I didn't lead loud enough, that I didn't command a room. I smiled gently, but here's what I've learned since. You don't need to be the loudest to be heard. You don't need to dominate a space to shape it. And you certainly don't need to fire someone to prove you're in charge. A ripple of soft laughter. I want to thank all of you for proving every day that kindness and clarity build better teams than fear ever could. We're not perfect, but we are present, and that's how we'll keep growing. Applause followed, not thunderous, but warm, the kind that says we're with you. That evening, I took the long way back to my office. Through engineering, through marketing, through the service desk, I stopped to chat, to listen, to laugh. In the hallway near the break room, someone had written a new line on the whiteboard. Different color this time. Purple ink. She didn't speak over us. She made room for us to speak. I felt something catch in my throat. Not grief, not pride. Something quieter, something steadier, peace. Back at my desk, I opened my notebook. The same one I had packed the day I left. Inside were ideas from another life, half-baked pictures, abandoned frameworks, phrases I had jotted down in meetings where no one asked my opinion. On the last page, written in my father's handwriting, was a quote I had forgotten about. "True power isn't who speaks first, it's who listens longest and still decides." Well, I closed the notebook slowly, looked out at the city, then leaned back, exhaled, and smiled. I didn't win because I shouted louder. I won because I never stopped listening. Leadership isn't about volume, it's about vision, integrity, and the courage to listen. Meredith's journey reminds us that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. It means observing, understanding, and acting with purpose. True power isn't taken by force, it's earned through trust and resilience. In a world that often celebrates noise, this story proves that calm conviction and quiet strength can outlast and outshine even the loudest voices. Sometimes the most impactful leaders are the ones who don't speak to be heard. They speak to make others feel seen.